Welcome to Books and Brew. I'm your host, Andrew Huff. I'm a novelist, screenwriter, director, all-around media producer. And this show is all about sitting down with fellow writers and getting to know their writing process so I can steal it and use it for my own success. Now, every single writer that I know, when they're writing, they love to have some kind of beverage right alongside with them. And so while we get to know about them, get to know about their books and what it takes to become a writer, I get to try their favorite writing brew with them. So let's meet today's guest and find out what I'm going to be drinking. Neil Tomba is a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary and the senior pastor of Northwest Bible Church in Dallas, Texas, a position he has held since 2001. His first book, The Listening Road, is the remarkable story of his very own 33-day journey cycling 3,000 miles across the United States on a mission to engage with people from all walks of life in real conversations about the things that matter most. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Thank you, Andy. It's good to be here with you. And I want to add that Andy and I worked together for a time, and it's so good to reconnect.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. Just that whatever I am today, I credit to Neil Tomba. And no, just kidding. My mom would kill me to know that. But no, we got to do some really fun stuff at Northwest creatively. So I'm really excited to have you on this show because your book is awesome. I've gotten to read it. You're going to talk a little bit more about it in just a second. We're going to talk about the process of writing it. But I want to know what I am going to be drinking today. What do you drink when you're being creative and writing, Neil?
Here it is, Andy, coconut water. And being a cyclist and that kind of thing, you know, same drink for both cycling and writing.
Very nice. Very cool. Now, here's the fun thing about this show, Neil, is usually when I find out what a writer drinks while they're being creative or writing, or whatever. A lot of times that's something that needs to be brewed. So often it's very much coffee or it's very much tea. And so what I will do is like set a timer, and we'll have like something ready to steep. And that's when they get to pitch their book. Now for you, I have my own coconut water here that I'm going to try. And awesome. You have the amount of time it takes me to open it and pour the water to tell us why we need to buy your book.
Okay.
So here we go. You ready? I don't know how long this timer is going to be. It's good. I'll try to take my time, but this is all you get. Here we go.
Okay. The Listening Road. Here's why you have to buy my book, because we're in a day and time where people can't even start a conversation, let alone have a conversation. And we went out for 33 days. And we went and we listened to people, we talked to people. And here's the amazing thing, Andy, when people were convinced that we were willing to listen to their story, even when they said, I don't have time to talk, in the middle of the conversation, they would say, do you have time for one more story? And so that's why you need to buy the book, because we were made to connect, to have conversations. And
that's it. So sorry. That's... I'm kidding. Okay. Hey, in all seriousness, yes, this was really born out of a passion you had for the church, right? At Northwest. So talk about that for a second, how the whole genesis of the idea came out.
So Andy, as I would go to Colorado during the summers, ride my bike around, hike, do whatever, I would have these conversations with people. And one time I was in Colorado and I thought, I want to travel across the country on my bike and have conversations. And I talked about this with my wife for 18 years before I did it. And I would tell her, Billy, you can ride behind me in our SUV. And she would just roll her eyes and say, no way. And anyway, our church, we had a conversation in our church with all our members. And we admitted to one another, you know what? Jesus tells us to go out and have conversations about him through all the world. And although a lot of us have known him for years, we're not doing it. And so our church came up with a 7-year vision to pursue that. And I said, you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to pursue this idea of riding my bike across the country and having conversations. And
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, and obviously, we're going to get into the book section in just a second, but you were the book, or we're going to get in specifics about the writing of the book and all of that during the journey. But your book is it's focused, yes, on, there's the aspect of riding on a bike across the entire country.
Yes.
But while that's a thread of the book and that's the storyline of the book, it's really those conversations that you're having, those stories that you're hearing about. That's what I found, at least, the most compelling aspect of the book. In an already, it would have been compelling anyway to hear about your trip.
Yes.
Right. But now you're hearing all these stories from, and it really is true, all walks of life. And so I definitely recommend the book personally, because, and you and I think I've said this to you, this sentiment. Sometimes, a pastor may feel compelled to write a book, and they, because they have a platform and they have a sermon series everyone loved, or something like that. And so, it'll be, and usually they're not terrible books. I mean, they're great books to sort of encourage and inspire. But yours is so unique because of the aspect of, it's about this trip, and a lot, not just sort of the amazingness of it, but also the hardships of it. And then those conversations that you're having, and what you're learning from people, but also what people are able to take away from their encounters with you. So I think it's great. And so, yes, people should go buy it.
Andy, I'll tell you a funny story. For years, Vila, my wife, had been trying to convince me to write a book from a sermon series or whatever. And I just was never very motivated to do that. And so instead, I rode my bike across the country, had conversations, and wrote The Listening Road.
There you go. I love it. All right. Hey, I got to try this. Here's also the fun part about this show. I get to try things I've never tried before. I have never tried coconut water.
Wow.
So you're witnessing history, Neil. And this is the first time I'm going to drink coconut water. And I'm just saying, I'm not the biggest coconut guy. So this is going to be huge. We're going to see what I think. But also, I don't review the beverage till the end of the show. So I'm not going to tell you right away. You just have to try to decide what my face is doing so here we go. All right.
Okay. I saw a little something there.
My eye starts twitching.
Your mouth made a little interesting move.
Yeah. All right. Got our coconut water. We've introed your book. And here's what I'm really excited to talk about, because up to this point, I've interviewed a lot of author friends who write fiction. But you got to write a story that was real. You didn't have to invent any of this. You lived it. And so that's what I'm really interested in. There's kind of two parts to this process that we'll talk about. The first one is, so you're on this 33-day cycling trip across the country. You're not just, again, as I've mentioned, attempting to have conversations with real people. There's the challenge of just the bike ride itself, right? And so you went into it knowing that you were going to write a book about the experience. So what's in your mind, or what are the things that you're doing because I'm assuming that you're not also getting to the end, because the book makes this very clear about some of the end of your days. You're not sitting down to write any passages at the end of some of those days. So what was that like, knowing that you were going to write it and yet wanting to capture as much as possible of the experience?
Andy, it was interesting that I was totally exhausted at the end of every day, spiritually, emotionally, physically, in every way. I was exhausted. And, one of the things I think we'll need to wrestle with, and you kind of let me know when we want to talk about it, is this idea of team. And it just hits me that often when we think about writing a sermon, writing a book, writing an article, we often think it's, okay, I got to go in my room and I got to do this. And that's pretty true. But there's an aspect of this whole thing for me that I had to have the help of others. So here's the number one biggest thing that we did. We had a professional film crew with us, because we also had the thought of making a docuseries. Every morning when I started, and it was kind of a pain because people were waiting and we had to go find a spot, but I would get in a spot and the filmmaker would say to me, "What are you doing today? What are you thinking today? What's on your mind today?" At the end of every day, when I was ready to go to bed, whatever, he would pull me aside, we'd find a spot, and he'd say, "Hey, Neil, tell me a little bit about your reflections of the day. How are you feeling?" So just that alone, had that captured every day. Also, of course, we're recording every conversation. And we have 40 terabytes of film, Andy. So it's crazy how much we have. But there were times where they're recording out of the back of my SUV, and we're just talking because I had a mic on. "Hey, what did you think about that last conversation? What's your reflection?" So we had all of that to work from.
So did you, when you found yourself then at the end, and now you're starting to enter into the process of the book, was that your primary source, or were you also writing things down? Were you, going back to the people that were with you, having conversations through the process of the book? Like, what are some of those extra things that you're doing? Because obviously, like, that's awesome. I mean, like, yes, on something like this, having a film crew there with you, turning it into a docuseries, it's fantastic. And so, that's a great resource to have, but I'm curious if there were other resources that you gleaned from in that process.
Here comes the team thing again. Andy, I read some classic travelogues before going, and I really am amazed how those people must have taken notes, but also they would use little voice recorders. So that's why, it was so good to have that video, because that's what we were essentially doing. Also, one of the ladies on the trip, she did a blog every day. And then she made a photo book from it. So she had photos and the blog. So also we had that as this kind of quick reference guide.
Okay, yeah.
Which was a great resource, because I will tell you, when we started the writing process, I was totally overwhelmed. And I think we recorded 117 conversations. Andy, my mind was mush by the end of that time, as well as my legs.
Right.
I was like, how am I even going to begin here? So a lot of help. And we did have a meeting with the team after, just to talk over.
Okay, yeah.
And we can talk more about that later. That'll come up.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay. Yeah. So you had all of that to be able to, all of this that's documenting the trip, which already is incredibly helpful in terms of, because sometimes when we have an experience like that, it's hard to sort of hit every thing that was going on, especially if someone were to ask you break down each day by day, what was happening. And so it can get a little tricky to be like, well, yeah, this is how it went. And so you're kind of at the end of the process, you get there to, or you have a lot of the resources, you have the people that helped with that. But now I'm sure for you, when it actually came to the book, you got to take all that and condense it down.
Painful.
You're not talking about every single day. You're not talking about every single conversation. So how do you weed through that and come out on the other end with a great book?
Oh, so Andy, I could, I'll just tell you, Andy, I could have never done that myself. I don't have the experience in writing. I also felt like every conversation was so important and every detail was so important. So one of the things that I had agreed on when we entered this trip, so we had an agent, we had a book agent. who really, it was amazing. We got this book agent, but part of the agreement was that I would use a co-writer.
Mm.
And I say that because it actually turned out to be a great experience, Andy,
Mm-hmm.
to work with that person. And he really, I mean, we went back and forth, and he really helped me just to keep whittling down. And you know what else is helpful? When the publisher says, you only have X number of words.
Yeah, that is helpful. Yeah.
But that's
great.
the thing. Even if you're maybe not using a publisher, you do kind of have to have a little bit of strategy, right?
Yes.
How long is this book going to be? Knowing there is a formula that kind of works in terms of number of words, how long chapters are. And so I had to learn, oh, wow, there's a discipline here, and I'm going to have to live by it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the same thing's true on the fiction side, because there's definitely not a just write the story and however long it is. There's a target for length, because they just know. And, you know, I mean, obviously the industry is what it is, and it's been around for a long time. And so there's definitely an element of this, of knowing kind of what is the most marketable thing. And the most saying that can probably sound a little bit like, well, no, but you know, just because it's not just marketable as feels. Yeah, exactly. But you definitely want to try to get those, for a fiction author, get your story, for you, get these people's stories out to as wide of an audience as possible. And there's some of that is the business side of things, but it is to try to get in as many hands as possible is what it is. Which, and I was just talking to another author about this very thing. If you focused purely on like, I just want to write it for me, like, then it probably doesn't go very far, which sometimes can be okay. And that may be what you wanted to do. But if you're trying to share a story or experience to a wide audience, there are some things like that need to be taken into consideration.
Andy, I'm not a very good painter. You know, if I wanted to do a painting for my office privately and nobody ever see it, that's one thing. I didn't want to write a book for a piece of decoration in my office. That's why I'm more than happy to live with the, I'm going to call it discipline of number of words, chapters, how to write it.
That's awesome. That's a great analogy too. So when you're working with the writer, here's a question. And I thought about this as I was reading the book, which is, one of the, there's two things going on. There are the conversations that you're having. There's the trip itself. I found myself sometimes wanting to dig a little deeper into the bike side of it and the trip side of it, because I was like, man, there's so much there of the hardship of that, of what's it like just even being on a bike, going through all these different environments that you're going through. And so there was an aspect of as I'm reading it, wanting to hear a little bit more about that. And yet, to your point that you just made of only got a certain amount of space. There's the conversation side, which I'm sure for you, as from the pastoral angle, man, you're like, I want to tell all these stories that I'm hearing, right? And so, what are the conversations you and the writer are having in terms of that balance between the focus on the hardship of the journey versus the conversations that are happening?
So, Andy, one of the things about me is I geek out over bikes, running, endurance kind of events. And there was part of me that was like, man, I could just write a book and make a movie on just that aspect and leave out all the other conversations. And really the conversation with the writer as we worked together was really kept coming back to, what is the purpose of this book? And really, and how do we want to accomplish that purpose? And letting that help us with the trimming and cutting and those things that fall on the editing floor that I'm like, oh, give me that back.
Yeah.
So that really was the central part of the conversation. And the great thing about this particular writer, he's a New York Times bestseller. His name's Marcus Brotherton. He's a great guy. He was willing to debate with me. Here's a guy who's never written a book. Here's a New York Times bestseller. And I mean, we spent hours together every week. And I'm like, hey, Marcus, I don't like how you said this here. I want to rewrite this. This doesn't sound like my voice. Now, remember I said this. And I never once felt like he kind of was like, you're an idiot and I'm the expert, which is probably kind of true. And never did he make me feel like that. And I think as a result, we came out with something that was truly my voice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and what I like about that too is I think even for someone who maybe is a writer, writing nonfiction, not maybe by themselves, they're writing about a subject that, you know, they're not co-writing with someone. I still think it's important to have people that are reading, to have people that are that you're bouncing ideas off of. Because again, we go back to, you brought this up earlier, right? It's that team aspect, because so we can kind of, as artists or as even people who have a story to tell, get narrow to the point where we don't, we maybe are really, really liking something that actually isn't working. And so, or wouldn't work. And so having other voices that can speak into it and not feeling like that criticism is a negative thing, but is a positive thing that can, and I say criticism, I mean, obviously what you experienced is more of that sort of collaboration versus criticism. And I think that's an important distinction, that only serves, or at least this is how I feel, that only serves to improve a book or another creative work that you have, versus I'm going to shut my door and I'm going to just churn it out and it is what it is and no one can tell me to change, you know.
Andy, you know, every week I write a sermon, right? Yeah. I write a little 7 or 8 page pamphlet, book, whatever you want to call it. Every sermon I do, I get input on it from another person twice a week. It's built in the schedule.
Yeah.
And they get to say whatever.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
And I hear a lot, that's not working, Neil. And it's,
yeah. Well, and to that, like, is such a great immediate example of the fact that you are in some ways it's a story, right? What you're writing in terms of a sermon, and you're going to step onto a stage and deliver it immediately to X number of audience, right? And so if you really were so narrowly focused, you were had tunnel vision on the thing and then stepped in there and it doesn't land. Oh, right.
It's 30 minutes of pain, not just for me, but everybody else.
Right. And so sometimes as an author, we may not feel that same thing that you might feel in that instance, but I think it applies. The same thing applies. Absolutely. Where it's going to land the same way. You may not be in the room and see the looks on people's faces, but that is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So I am so fascinated by that process, and as well think that regardless of the genre, or regardless of the fiction versus nonfiction, or really even creative work, there are so many concepts and themes and ideas and helpful tips, that transcend all of that, where it's not just a rule that occurs in this particular field. So for this thing that we're talking about with teamwork and getting feedback and this collaboration thing, sermons, nonfiction book, fiction book, it's this, there are these things work in those spaces because they are things that, and there's probably more beyond this, even creative work, but just human beings sort of interacting with one another to improve and to make better, and having different perspectives really is probably the best way to put it. So I should probably review the water, Neil, because we're kind of getting down to the end of our time. I think I don't want to give too much away in terms of your book, but it's out now. It's available. Did you do the audio? Did you record the audio for it? Cool. So you can get an audiobook version, but as Neil already mentioned, it's also being turned into a docuseries, which is really exciting. And that's going to be coming out soon. So they should definitely look into the Listening Road, and we're going to give them website addresses and everything where they can find out about it. But let me review coconut water first, which, hey, here's what I'll say. Okay. As a guy that is not big into coconut, it's the specific taste of coconut. I expected something along those lines, and I'm not getting it, which is good. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I have drank the whole glass. Like, what if I had been like, here's time to review, and I pull it back and it's still like up to here.
Yeah. If you ride your bike across the country, you might want to use that now.
Hey, there you go. Oh my gosh, we could go on and on about that. Like the whole riding across the country thing. Oh, this is what I was going to say. I'll throw this in here and then I'll let you give website addresses and stuff. Is going back to the balance between the stories and the bike experience itself. Yes. Even in the moments where I felt like I wanted to know more about what was going on with the journey itself, at the end of the book, I feel like there is a great balance between the times where you're just so into the story of the bike ride. And there's moments I don't want to spoil anything, but there's like moments that I'm just like cheering the cyclists on, right? Just in terms of getting to their destination. And just hearing these incredible stories that, as a fiction author, one of the things that I do is base a lot of my stories on real life experiences and real life people and real life news headlines and stuff like that. And there are so many stories that are one of maybe 30, but you like hear that one story and you're like, somebody got to write a book about that guy's life. Like,
yes.
Like that could be a whole book into itself. So that's what's so great about your book and the encounters that you had is just, that's the kind of depth of story that's there. And so anyway, I was really blessed by it. I definitely encourage everybody to pick it up. So anyway.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
And Andy, I want to say something because you've written a couple of books, and even with a co-writer, the amount of work required to write this book, the full engagement, the need to be fully present blew me away.
Yeah.
It was, I knew it was going to be a big task. It was bigger than I imagined.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. All right, Neil. Hey, I know I don't want to keep you too much longer, but tell us where we can find you online. Where can we find out about the Listening Road? Where can we find out about Neil Tomba?
Okay, so first, the easiest thing for the Listening Road is you can go to Amazon, the Listening Road, and you'll find it there. So that's easy. I have a website, neiltomba.com, and I'm also on Instagram, Neil Tomba, NeilTomba, and you'll hear things there about kind of my adventures as well as thoughts and things from the Listening Road.
Very cool. You can find out about my stories that I write at andrewhuffbooks.com. There you can find all the links to my social platforms. So I'm on all of them. But this has been Books and Brew with Neil Tomba. We've been drinking coconut water. Neil, thank you so much for your time. And maybe one day, we'll get on a bike together and I'll drink some coconut water.
All right.
Right alongside you.
Do that.
Thanks a lot, Neil.
Okay.